Today's World Traveler is going to take you on a detailed tour of the Vatican Museum in Rome. The spiral staircase entrance to the Vatican Museum tells you right away that this is a very special place. The Vatican is one of the top 10 museums in the world, particularly when it comes to ancient Greek, ancient Roman, Egyptian, and the Italian Renaissance. Hugo Buehring is going to be our tour guide as we enjoy a walk through the halls of the Vatican, ending up and culminating at the Sistine Chapel, looking down the spiral staircase of the popes. Let's join Hugo for the tour.
There is so much in the Vatican museums that we will at times be just streaming through to the next point. In fact, that's what we'll do, is we'll go from place to place, basically. Just a teeny bit of history. You have to remember the Roman Empire. You remember the Roman Empire, okay? As of 500, it was gone. The church was starting up about that time, but you had 500 years where nothing much happened. The church gradually got much more power and was controlling things, certainly in Rome. And then about most of the 14th century, the popes decided to move to France. I don't know why they decided to move to France, but they did. Then in the middle of the 15th century, you had the two popes, as Dennis told us yesterday. And that went on for a while, and finally we got one pope back in Rome again. And then things started picking up, and from that point on is really where we have the most of the art that we appreciate today. And from that point on, you can figure that basically what you have here is the collections of popes over 400 years. Now, this is not... Popes were from rich families, they had a lot of money themselves, and as art became appreciated more and people started collecting art, the popes collected art. So you had 400 years worth of art. So the majority of the art in the Vatican museums is Etruscan and Greek and Roman. There is some early Christian, some medieval, and some Renaissance art. The art that we're going to see today, we will see some of the greatest sculpture in the world, some of the specific pieces that are still among the top 10 if somebody were to make such a rating. And then the other art that we'll see is art that was basically built into these palaces. These were the Pope's palaces, and as each Pope came along, if they were strong, they decided to modify the place to go with their personality and their likes and desires. So what you will see is the Pope's collections in the Pope's houses, and they would have artists come in and decorate, as anybody with wealth does. And you'd get the greatest artists of the time to come and do things. So we'll see frescoes they're not art hanging on the walls, they're art on the walls. A lot of the work is fresco. We'll see Raphael's frescoes. We'll see tapestries, there are maps, which we will walk through quickly. And of course, we'll see the Sistine Chapel, which I'll explain a little bit more as we go along. The first thing that we're going to do, though, as we go in, is be our first opportunity for a group picture. So we will all assemble. We give either Dennis or myself, we make a pile of cameras, and then either Dennis or myself will click off the pictures one after another, so we do this in a timely fashion, as we say. So follow me, and we'll go on in. This is the Apollo Belvedere. It's called the Belvedere because this is the Belvedere Palace. This is put here by Julius II, and it was really the start of the Vatican Museum collections. This is the Greeks. The Greeks loved balance, and this is the world's maybe perfect example of balance in sculpture. It's not, you remember all the the mummies, they're all stiff, everything's stiff. The medieval art is stiff because it was designed to instruct, and it wasn't about humanity really. This was an attempt to portray people, but idealized people. So this is the god Apollo, and there is a question as to what he was doing with the arms that he's missing, but he's a hunter. And he has a bow in this hand that's broken off. We can sort of agree on that. And he's either shot his arrow or is getting ready to shoot his arrow. But this is called a contrapposta stance, which you will see today, actually, if you look around for young Italian men standing around on the street corner. You get this sort of, in Hawaii too, actually. But that's it. He's moving, but he's not moving. He looks like somebody you might know, but he's got perfect features. and which we actually sort of have today with models and so forth, and movie actresses. So this was at the time the most perfect thing that they had seen until, and now let us move to the next niche. In 1506, Michelangelo is working around the Vatican, and the artist Sangallo comes and gets him, and he goes, "Hey, they have found something you will not believe." They still had the literature of the Greeks, and they knew about this piece. It's called the Laocoon, named after the priest from Troy, who was a priest of Apollo, but he wanted the Trojans to win the war. Remember the Trojan horse and all that. The gods wanted the Greeks to win. Huh, too bad for Laocoon. They sent serpents down and took him and his two sons. That's what's happening. They are being crushed to death by the snakes. But this had been written about. Nobody had ever seen it. Michelangelo goes over, and you can immediately see the difference here. This isn't balance. This is violence and extreme emotion, and the angle of it. It's not centered. It's not, in one place. You've got all this energy coming out of this, and this changed everything. When they found this, when they got it out of Nero had it in his golden house, but this had been covered over for hundreds of years, and so they dug it up and they carried this through the streets of Rome, and everybody's just going like, "Whoa! I guess this is different." This was the MTV at the time, if you will. And this really changed everything. In fact, if you get into detail, when we go into the Sistine Chapel, you can tell what's before and after when Michelangelo saw this. And you will see this motion when we get to the Renaissance. Same thing happened. You had balance. You got to where we did people very well, but they were idealized people. And then it went beyond that to the Baroque, which, as you remember, our guide told us today, involves you. It's also very much more emotive, and you have different angles and people reaching for things and actions that aren't completed yet. So this is called the Laocoon, marvelous piece of work. This was done by an Athenian, a Greek, who was brought to Rome in the 2nd century. And the reason that it's still here is that this, before the Apollo and the Laocoon, this is one of the best things they had. And it was originally a statue of Hercules, seated. But it's the musculature of the human body. And again, you have to remember that until you get into dissection, it's hard to draw muscles. And this has come and gone over the years, and certainly during the years from the Roman Empire until the Renaissance, it wasn't much done. This is one of Michelangelo's favorite pieces. And when we get into the Sistine Chapel, if you look at the Last Judgment, which is on the far wall, and you see Christ the Judge, think about this a little bit, because there are heavy echoes of it. This, again, was a piece that all the artists that came to Rome came to see, and they learned from it about anatomy and so forth, among other things, and you can tell, even though it's just a torso, you can still picture what the rest of it must have been like from the twist of it and so forth. From Nero's Golden House. And one of the things that it points out is that the Romans, sure, they beat the Greeks, but as I said, they also then hired Greek sculptors and Greek artists. Romans were great engineers, and they were heavily into bigger is better. This is a very good example of it, This is, yes, they just like to take something that was wonderful and they would make it 20 times bigger. We all know people like that, right? And this is just an example of this sort of thing. The Hercules over here is interesting in that it used to be on top the pediment of the Pantheon. And it would have been, actually it's pretty close. You can still tell it's gilded bronze and there's still some of the gilding on it. So you can see what it would have looked like. If you remember the Pantheon, and at the peak of that pediment, this was up there just shining in the sun. Would have been absolutely gorgeous.
In the next room, we came across two very large marble coffins.
One of them was designed for Constantine's wife. Constantine being the emperor who finally legalized Christianity, basically, and his wife went to Jerusalem and got the true cross, and St. Peter and Chains Church has the chains that she and her daughter found. So this was designed for her. What we're going to do now is go upstairs and we go through some of it's a very, very long hallway that will first have statues and then some tapestries and then some maps, and then we get to the rooms that Raphael himself decorated. There were as many female gods as there were male gods. So in this gaze, Diana was the huntress and was good for hunting and crops and so forth and so on. On the other side, we see Diana of Artemis, who is basically the same goddess, but here we see fertility personified. Pretty simple to figure that out, isn't it? Yes. You know,
Miranda outfit.
a Carmen Miranda outfit. Well, I suppose. The ceiling is the Mannerist style, which is after Raphael, and you can see it's also a little bit of the grotesque, but basically it's really, you can just take a lot of time looking at it. It's incredibly involved and vibrant.
You're watching a tour of the Vatican museums, and in a few minutes we'll be taking you on to Venice, Italy. We've now entered the private rooms of the Pope, highly decorated with wall and ceiling murals.
It's an important room in that it tells the story of Constantine and how he came to Christianity. This is the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, where he was battling his rival, really, for control of the empire. And the angels came and showed him the sign of the cross in the sky, and he said, "In this sign conquer." He won the battle. He said, "This is a good idea," and allowed Christianity, and then became converted to Christianity. So just take a few moments to look around at the different scenes, and then we'll go on to the next room. These rooms that we're going through were Julius's private apartments. Okay, and this is why he had several artists starting on these apartments, good artists. And then Bramante, the architect, told him about this guy from up north, this young Raphael. And when he was 25 in 1507, he was brought to Rome by Julius, and Julius said, I'd like you to do my apartments. And he told him to wipe out this stuff that had already been done. So in some places, like here, he left the ceiling because he didn't want to go over everything. Some of these people were his contemporaries, and as you can imagine, this did not make him, beloved. The scene over here is the story of Heliodorus in the temple from the Old Testament, where the soldier that's on the ground was trying to steal from the temple, and out of nowhere came a horseman and two young lads. At his Swiss guards here, you can see this is before Michelangelo did their uniforms, they had remained faithful to him, and it was at this point that he declared that the papal guard would always be Swiss. And so that is why you have those fellows standing outside in their pantaloons today and not just any old guard. What he presented in here was the idea of the sum total of man's knowledge. And if you turn around this way, this was the really sort of the start of it, which is if you want to know things or talk about knowledge, you have to know God. And so this talks about the great thinkers of the church. You have the truth in heaven, and then you have the church's people carrying out below. And again, you have Julius II as was St. Augustine on the right, and I believe it's Gregory on the left. But these are all the great thinkers of the church, basically. Then the School of Athens talks about the use of the rational mind. And what you have is in the center the great thinkers of the world, the two schools of thought, Plato, Aristotle, right, on the right, and those two schools of thought. It's interesting to note that since he was painting a lot of people, Raphael used his contemporaries in a lot of cases. The Plato on the left there is actually Galileo, since Raphael knew what he looked like. Raphael was painting this just at the same time when Michelangelo was working on the Sistine Chapel. He's the one looking straight at you. He's the second one from the right with the black hat. Yeah, that's Raphael. That's Michelangelo, and that's Galileo. Okay, this is the only one I'll say anything about, and here's the Miracle of the Borgo fire. At one time, there was a fire in the Borgo, and People were afraid of everything until the Pope came out, made the sign of the cross, and the fire went out, or so the story goes. This is what this depicts. Michelangelo, who considered himself basically a sculptor, when he was asked by Julius to do this, he went, oh, he basically said, I'm not a painter. Julius said, yeah, but I'm the Pope. And Julius was a pope who had beaten people, who had beaten the armies of Charles V in battle with himself leading the troops. This was a man to be reckoned with, and if he asked you to do something, it was a good idea. So Michelangelo said, fine. He started with assistants, and he looked at what they'd done. He said, this ain't gonna work. Started all over again, did it all by himself. So for those of you who remember Charlton Heston lying on his back with candles, go rent the movie again, and once you've been in the Sistine Chapel, you'll really appreciate this.
There's no question that the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel is the single most important painting in the history of art. And the central focus of the ceiling is God giving life to Adam. But you really have got to be there in person to appreciate the incredible effect that you'll get from the ceiling painted by Michelangelo in the Sistine Chapel. Finding our way out of the Vatican Museum, we go back down the spiral staircase. By the way, when you're entering the museum, there is an elevator that's much easier to take when you're going up, but going down the spiral staircase is one way to get out of the museum. Another way is out the back door of the Sistine Chapel if you're looking for bus number 64, which is what we're looking for. Technically, this staircase is for groups only, but if you're in the Sistine Chapel, just look for it and it'll lead you right to Bernini's colossal colonnade. And onto the bus. Number 64 takes you right into Piazza Venezia, and it would bring you all the way to the Termini train station, which actually is our ultimate goal because we're leaving Rome. We're leaving Rome the next day, however. It's time for an evening at Piazza Venezia, looking at the great monument to Victor Emmanuel II. It's often derided as the typewriter or the wedding cake. At any rate, it's a huge marble monument right in the heart of Rome. And there's one of the busiest traffic intersections in front of it, the Piazza Venezia. Particularly nice at late twilight with that deep blue sky in the background and the white marble statues, the Palazzo Venezia where Mussolini harangued the crowds, the beginning of the Corso in the distance. A couple of giant statues lead up to the Capitoline Hill, the Piazza di Campidoglio, designed by Michelangelo back in the Renaissance. Today it's a series of museums.